Well, hello, everybody. It's great to be back. We are in our third week of our Psalm series called fourth week of yeah, that's right, of our Psalm series, Songs of Rage. And sadly, John was not with us this week. But happily, John is having a great time with his sister, going to a concert. And so Dottie and I were together last night, and Dottie introduced us to Psalm 139, which is a beloved of a lot of us, and how it kind of led her into the idea of shadow work. So, Dottie, can you tell us a bit about what you shared and maybe a little bit about what shadow work is?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. So I've done work with my psychology research in shadow work for several years now. And over the summer, I was asked to speak at a church in their Shadowland series. And as I was kind of poking around, a theme that came up was looking at this Psalm 139, which begins with, God, you've searched me and you know me. And then it talks about darkness is not dark to you. It is as light to you. And then there's this line that's really iconic of like, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I am fearfully, wonderfully made. So as I've been in years of research on shadows, and then this last summer was asked to speak on shadows at a church. I've just been really mulling over where in the Bible are we invited to go into the shadow. So there's different definitions of what shadow means. It is a Jungian, a Carl Jung concept that many people have adapted in their own psychological practices and reformed for areas outside of psychology too. But it's really about growing in self-awareness and accessing the pieces of ourselves that we repress or deny. And the shadow is not necessarily pieces that are bad about ourselves, but the pieces that our family systems or society haven't rewarded. And for many of us, these are really scary places and places we've deemed as dark or we're ashamed of. And what I love about this psalm is it's saying dark is not dark to you. It is as light to you. And kind of this invitation that to not villainize darkness, and not to say darkness is bad or evil, but to actually say there is something there. I heard in my breakout room afterwards, God made light, God made dark. Like there is goodness in both. And darkness, while for many of us feels like a really scary place to go to, God is there. And that first line of Psalm 139, you've searched me and you know me. It's almost as if the psalm is saying, you've searched me and you know me and you still love me in my dark places, the places I'm ashamed of, the places I repress or deny. And so we talked a little bit about this in the context of relationships, that in many relationships we show up and there are pieces of ourselves that are shadows that can kind of turn into poisons and be roadblocks to us loving people well. So I shared a story with my husband in a recent fight we got into, and on the surface was me shutting down and being offended and walking away from a conversation. But what was deep underneath was my shadow was I really wanted to be connected. I really wanted to feel close to him. I felt ashamed that I wasn't a good mom or wife. And ultimately I was scared and fearful of like, does he enjoy me in this season of our lives? Now I've shared with the group, my husband is my dearest person in my life, my safest relationship. So with shadow work, especially with relationships, I think it's good for us to start looking at our own shadows in the places we feel safe, so that we can kind of build the skill of going into our shadows. And so part of the work of shadow is going into my shadow and trying to figure out what is beneath the surface. So on the surface is me shutting down, walking away from a conversation, but beneath it is that there's something there, shame and fear and my own kind of what would be deemed like negative feelings. And there's actually something really good and beautiful there. Like, oh, I'm just longing to be connected. And I just really want to make sure that I'm a good mom and wife. So we did a mindful reflection, which is for some people really good. For some, we're like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? That's how Harvard goes. Some things click, some things don't. But the mindful reflection was for us to really go in to our own shadow in these relationships, to feel the safety and warmth of the relationship, but also to feel the areas we feel disconnected and to access the shadow beneath the surface and go into dark places, not with shame, but in this kind of holistic, I am fearfully and wonderfully made perspective. So we did that, and then we imagined these two spheres holding hands. That's kind of a long explanation for what we did last night, but it was rich and it's tricky, and shadow work is really tricky. But ultimately, the goal is that we grow in our awareness and we access things that we deny, so that they can come out in healthy ways instead of poisonous ways. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was a really rich night, and it was there was a lot of depth. There was a lot of deep places we went into last night. And so we had our discussion groups, and we were just talking and saying, like, our groups are really different. Like my group was maybe just not quite ready to share some of the shadow work that we each did, but we had some cool conversations around Psalm 139, and one of the questions was like, basically, like, are binaries even real? Like, does darkness even exist? Because there's always light, there's always shadow. So, and it was a bit of a mind bending conversation, which I love. It's not everybody's cup of tea. But I think where we landed was somewhere really beautiful, which was a lot of what you were just saying, which is that God knows every single part of our internal system. God knows our fear, and God doesn't look at it and categorize it. He just, she just loves it all. And that's something I've been learning. I've been reading in my research, I've been doing some work in the mystics, and that's a lot of the work they do, is like, there is this person that we are, who only God knows, and God knows fully, and God loves fully. And that can be a little hard to like be like, really? Like, you love my greed? Like, do you? And God says, yes, I love what makes you greedy. I even love that. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, that's a good word, Dawn. Our group talked about like the places that our religions or family systems have told us we need to like repress these shadows. So one person shared, I was told not to be angry. Like, that is, don't be angry. And actually accessing that anger has become tremendously difficult. I don't know how to access that anger. And so that is shadow work, right? Is like, oh, how do I actually access this anger? So it's not something that, the phrase is, what we suppress, we express, right? So like, and often in unhealthy ways. So how do we access that anger so that we're not suppressing it and expressing it in unhealthy ways, but we're actually moving through it? And a Buddhist principle is like inviting in these emotions for a cup of tea. Like, how do I invite in anger for a cup of tea? And then ask it to leave, right? Or as we've seen in the Psalms, there is holy rage. Like anger is good. Anger is beautiful and a sign of care. For some of us, the shadow that we've experienced, it was around mental health. So my anxiety, my depression felt like my shadow. And then the narrative that I got from the church was just pray to be joyful, right? Just pray to not be anxious. If you really love God, then you won't be depressed. Then you won't be anxious. And that's a stinger for many of us that have been crippled with anxiety and depression. And so there was something there of like, no, there's like, like God is with us here. And sometimes the anxiety and depression, it's I like what you said, Dawn. It was something along the lines of like, it's connected to like who we are. Like if I'm really anxious about something, it's like, oh, I actually just really care. Like I really want something to go well. And that's actually beautiful about me, right? So while it might be manifesting in anxiety, underneath it is a deep care. And how do I acknowledge that care or like longing or surrender it or whatever? So yeah, it was interesting and challenging for us to dig into it as well.
Just as we close, thinking about, you know, what maybe lingering questions or curiosities we have. I've been, as I say, I've been doing some of this work with the mystics, which is a bit brain bendy. But it's kind of a lovely meditative way. And, you know, it's a way that almost gets me out of my head and gets me out of thinking about like my anxiety, my anger, my greed. I'm just thinking about, I think about the love that is God and the God that is love, and looking at some of those paradoxes and just letting them both sit, you know. And the other thing I wanted to share with you was, you know, you talked about at the end of our guided meditation, you invited us to take these difficult parts of our relationship, and then the safe parts of our relationship, and put them together. And I was showing my group, I said, it was almost like, for me, it was like trying to put two north poles of a magnet together. And it was like, so I'm going to do some more work on that. How about you?
Yeah. I shared with my group that, like if I do this exercise with my husband, thinking about him, it's pretty easy to imagine the holding hands, right? Like of these spheres coming together. And what's happening in our brains is we're actually forming new neurological pathways to move beyond binaries, and our brains increase our capacity to love. Like when we are able to move out of the binaries, we are literally training our brains and our bodies to respond in these relationships with greater capacities of care and love. So it is a good exercise, even though it's challenging because our brains are doing so much. But when I choose someone that's a little bit more difficult, maybe in my family system, and I leave a family gathering, and I have practiced this, like I will leave a family gathering and I will try to do this, accessing the pieces that really felt painful, and also what are the pieces I'm really grateful about this person, and trying to imagine those. I want to scream. And I absolutely feel that, Dawn, like, no, there's no way. And that is the hard work of this like mindfulness and shadow work, is how do we really move into like a deeper understanding of ourselves and other people and the narratives that we're inheriting from culture and society and religion. Yeah.
And it requires a lot. I think it's helped along with a lot of self-compassion.
Yeah.
You know, being able, like for me to say to myself, this is happening, and that's not because I'm a horrible person. It's not because I don't love this person or this person doesn't love me. It's just, this is hard.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So much to think about. Thank you so much. It was great to see you.